Hi, everybody. This is Saad for the Sad Truth. Some of you may remember my clip, Sad Truth 32, where I talked about how people choose mates, dogs, and products that resemble them. And so there I was referring to a general matching mechanism whereby we have this, instantiation, if you'd like, of birds of a feather flock together across different contexts. Uh, Now, this mechanism could be extended to other types of relationships. And so, not only when it comes to, say, mating decisions, those who are similar are more likely to have successful unions, but we could extend this to, say, friendships. It turns out that how people form friendships and the strength of the friendship, uh, the tightness of the friendship is in part driven by how similar the members of that friendship are. In other words, the birds of a feather adage is operative when it comes to various types of relationships. Incidentally, one can ask, how do you define what constitutes similarity? Similarity on which measures? And so, of course, there are several ways that we can measure similarity, one of which might be similarity of values, similarity of beliefs, similarity of interests. And some of these similarity scores apply not only to friendships, but also to mating decisions. But here's an interesting one that you probably wouldn't have thought of. There's something, so this is, by the way, known as homophily, right? The idea that, we tend to prefer things that are similar to us. Uh, it turns out that there's this phenomenon known as genetic homophily, which is basically the idea as applied to friendships, where people tend to choose friends who have more similar genotypes themselves. And so, again, there are all sorts of interesting and at times surprising ways by which people assort with one another as a function of how similar they are to one another. Now, why am I talking about this today? Well, it's because I'd like to link it to a very important issue that the world is facing today, and namely, uh, how do we navigate through the so-called refugee crisis? And I say so-called because a huge number of the folks who are coming to the shores of the West are not people who are fleeing war, but they're frankly economic refugees or economic migrants. But in any case, when you're talking about, well, how do we decide who to let in? Well, there are several ideas that have been floated around, one of which is this idea of having an ideological test, right? I mean, do you have certain ideological stances that are incompatible with those of the host country? Now, I'd like to sort of formalize this, in a more scientific way by linking it to what I was talking about earlier, namely this idea of homophily, right? Or, assorted, in the same way that we engage in assortative mating, right? We tend to choose people who are similar to us as mates. Well, let's extend this to a more macro level, right? Instead of talking about two individuals who are choosing to mate or two individuals who are choosing to become friends, we could talk about the two parties being cultures A and B. Well, the more similarity that cultures A and B share, the more likely the union is to be harmonious. Now, it doesn't take somebody who is a rocket scientist or Einstein or Newton to understand that, but we know that there is scientific evidence for this general idea, right? As I said, we know that across a wide range of relationships, birds of a feather flock together is really the adage that defines the success of unions. And so it makes perfect sense that Slovenians and Poles are likely to integrate with one another uh, in a peaceful manner than Poles and Saudis. Not because groups A and B are evil or nice or not nice, it's because they either share a lot of common values or they don't. And so, using this principle of homophily, we can then argue that cultures that are more dissimilar to one another are likely to yield worse outcomes. And so we could come up with a quantifiable way to measure cultures along some index and then say, well, look, if you are within this level of similarity, then we can predict that people will integrate well into a host culture if they come from a more similar culture. And if you come from a culture that is more distinct, well, then we're going to have problems. And so the reason why I'm mentioning this is because again, it seems that most people who are infected with political correctness can't seem to navigate through some of these trivially banal and obvious issues, namely that not all people are the same when it comes to how likely they are to integrate into a place, assimilate into a place, contribute peacefully to a place. And here I've provided you with a scientific framework that actually explains all of this in very clear ways. Homophily is a driving mechanism across all sorts of relationships, and there is no reason to expect that that mechanism is somehow non-operative when it comes to deciding whether the fit between cultures A and B is going to be a good one or one that is going to create disunity. So there you have it, people. Always turn to science and reason when you're tackling any problem. Don't rely on political correctness. Don't rely on faith. Rely on your God-given brain? No. Rely on the brain that evolution has forged for you after millions of years of tinkering. Have a good weekend, everybody. Talk to you soon. Cheers.